Benvenute a tutte. Welcome to another edition of Italian America, Long Island. If any of you faithful viewers out there think that this looks a little strange today, it's because you're usually used to seeing my husband Dave introduce the shows. On the shows, he works with and he interviews and he plays with many musicians on Long Island. So today we thought we'd switch things up a little. So I'm going to interview Dave and find out how he became a musician. Now Dave, since we've been married for 46 years and together for 48 years, which I can't believe, I know how you started out in music, but I think that our viewers would like to find out. So how did you get involved with music?
Well, thank you, Paula. And I'd like to say to our viewers, music is such a wonderful thing, and we're just so happy that Paula and I can share music together. We've been in bands together for over 30 years, and I've been a musician for 55 years, quite a long time. But I got started actually in elementary school. I played the clarinet, as most kids have to take an instrument.
Right.
And then I continued in high school playing the bass clarinet, and that's where I got most of my formal training. But you know me as a guitarist.
Correct.
When I was in high school, some of the kids in the neighborhood got guitars for Christmas, and they all used to get together. And I wanted to be part of the group, and I remembered my brother had gotten a guitar for Christmas, so I ran home and I said, "Can I use your guitar? You haven't used it in 2 years." He said, "Sure, go ahead, take it." So we all used to get together. One of us took guitar lessons, and he showed everybody else what he had learned. Before long, we were playing together as an activity, just like kids would go out and play sports after school. We'd come home after school and say, "Hey, do you want to do some music? You want to play guitars?" And then we'd go over to somebody's house and we'd play guitar.
Well, that's a great pastime to do with your friends. But so after high school, were you still involved with music in college?
Oh yeah, I was. I was involved with music in college, but mostly what I did was I started to teach guitar. I taught guitar. My mother arranged my first guitar student, which was one of the neighborhood kids who was 9 years old. I was 16 at the time. And I started teaching this young lady how to play the guitar. And I used to go to Straub's music store all the time. And
That was in Hicksville, right?
no, that was in
Plainview.
Syosset.
Syosset?
It was in
Okay.
Syosset. He did move to Plainview. But anyway, I would go there, and one day he said to me, "Would you substitute for one of the teachers who didn't come in?" And I did, and I gave a lesson. Of course, it was a setup. He just wanted to interview me and see how well I did.
Right.
But he liked how I taught, and he hired me as a teacher. And before you know it, I had 16 or 17 students from Bart. And he moved his store to Plainview. And when he moved his store to Plainview, there was a contract he had to sign, and there was already a music school in that shopping center, so he couldn't offer music lessons. So he said to me, "Dave, you just inherited 16 students on your own. You no longer work for me." So I started my own little guitar business. And every Saturday while I was in college, I would come back. I had built a little studio in my basement, and I had 16 guitar students, boom, 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 one right after another.
What a great income for a college student.
That's how I paid my way through college, and it was wonderful.
But, all right, so that was teaching students, but how did you become involved as a professional musician, paid musician?
Well, that actually started in high school. And my first gig in high school, my friends and I were rehearsing. We had a drummer at the time, too, who sat in. And we were rehearsing, and we got a phone call, and it was my friend Ray. And Ray said to me, "Dave, you guys have a band, don't you?" I said, "Well, yeah, but we've never really played anywhere." He says, "Well, I'm at my cousin's wedding and the band didn't show up. Can you get down here to Belmore as fast as you can?" I was like so nervous, and we said, "All right, we'll do it." So I asked my dad. My dad piled us all into his Chevelle. He had a big Chevelle Malibu station wagon, which was huge. We got the drum set, the guitar amps, everything. Drove down to Belmore. We walk in there and set up as quickly as we can, and the maitre d', who didn't even speak to us, just said, "And now the band's going to play the first dance for the bride and groom." And it happened to be the very song that we were rehearsing that morning. which was You Belong to Me by the Duprees.
Wow.
So we saved the day. And then, of course, it was an Italian wedding. After that, we played our repertoire, which was mostly Ventures songs, because we were guitarists. We didn't sing at that time. And we knew the Italian tarantella. I knew how to play that. So we played that for about 45 minutes, and everybody loved it.
Wow. That's at 16. That's pretty.
It was wonderful,
yeah.
and in fact, I made.
Amazing.
This was back in 1963. I made $75 for the gig and had a roast beef dinner. And I said, I want to be a professional musician. I thought it was great. Remember, back then, the minimum wage was like $1 an hour, and I made $75 in 4 hours. And since that time, I've never made more than $75 for a gig.
Almost. And I know that for a fact. All right, so you had your first gig in high school, and in college, and during those years, you mostly played with friends for fun, and you had your students on the side. But then and I know, after we were married, you started playing in wedding band.
After we did this wedding gig, we started to do what was called little local high school dances.
Mm-hmm.
The Knights of Columbus had an organization called the Squires, which was for teenagers, and we would play these things. And so we got our experience doing that. And then, to get back to your original question, how did I start the wedding band?
Right.
Well, after many years of teaching guitar, and we got married, and I still continued the students on, and I actually had 35 guitar students while I was working my full-time job.
I remember.
And
We were gone all
said,
Saturday.
yes, we were gone quite a way, quite a long time there, but we managed to put our kids through college, and we managed to buy a house at that time, which was a big accomplishment. But I didn't really start off in a wedding band. I started off in a jazz band, if you recall.
Bob Daney group, right?
Bob
Tell us
Daney-
about the jazz group.
Bob
I forgot about
Daney
that.
was introduced to me by a fellow teacher from Farmingdale High School. Bob was a vibist, and he was very, very good, very
Excellent.
showy, and he got a lot of gigs. So Bob needed a bassist, so I doubled also a guitarist and bassist, so I played bass for Bob. And we would do quite a few gigs, at restaurants. He was really into restaurants. And I was playing with my friend Mal Kaufman. Mal Kaufman and I, we had what we call the teacher's band. I mentioned I was a teacher at Farmingdale High School. There were a bunch of very talented people that I worked with. Mal Kaufman, Bruce Gelman, Mark Sharon, and my dear friend Bob Monteleone. We all got together and we formed a teacher's band. And it started, oddly enough, on the day before Thanksgiving. The day before Thanksgiving was a half day of school back then. And what we would do is the kids would all cut out. It was high school. They didn't want to come for a half day. So I would bring my guitar in, and the kids knew I was going to be playing the guitar that day. And they loved it, so they would come into school. And I would start giving these little concerts. And then Bob would come into the classroom. Then Mal came into the classroom. Before you know it, we had 4 or 5 classes of kids in one room. The principal got wind of it, and he was supportive of the idea because we had the kids in school. Usually they would cut out.
So you got state aid.
Well, right. So what we did was he allowed us to go into the cafeteria, and we would set up in the cafeteria, and when the kids had free time, supposedly, they would come in and listen to us. We had a little teacher's band, which evolved after the Bob Daney group with Mal. That evolved. We started to do catering jobs. The teachers would have a retirement party every year. And this one guy that was a teacher who was retiring, his name was Ed, he liked us very much. And he said, Dave, will you and the guys play for our retirement party? So that was really our first catering gig that we did. Of course, I had done the wedding, and I had probably more experience than the other fellows in doing all of the high school dances and all. But so we started to play these retirement dances.
So you started playing these 4 different affairs for retirement parties at catering places, and how did that form, how did that amalgamate into a catering band? Because I know that for many years when our kids were young, you were playing out at different functions, Friday night, Saturday night. How did you get involved with the catering?
And I have to credit you with being such a wonderful mother and wonderful wife to sacrifice that, and being a musician's widow, as they say.
That's right.
Well, we realized that we had to spice it up. Bob was our singer back then,
Right.
so we added another young lady named Josie Negron. And Josie was a keyboard player. We only had guitars in the band, so we needed a keyboard, and she also sang very well. And at that time, Donna Summer was very popular, and she could sing Donna Summer wonderfully. So we added her to the band, and then what happened was we got hooked up with Teresa's Catering Hall
Right.
in Farmingdale.
Because he was the father of one of your students.
Yes, well, his
One of the
family,
owners, right.
they were a Farmingdale family, and it made sense. We were going to bring, a lot of the customers were from Farmingdale, and they would all know us as the band. As it turned out, we were going to do this big showcase so that the brides could see us and hire us. And unfortunately, we were all set up, and the singer could not make the event.
I remember that.
So we said, what are we going to do? We have all these brides coming. This is our big chance. I said, you know what? I'll sing a few songs. And as it turned out, we booked 4 or 5 weddings. So we realized we really didn't need to have this singer. We had Josie, and with my singing, and I started to focus in more on my singing. So that lasted a little while, and people started going different directions. And you were staying home too much. So
Alone. With 2 little kids.
Right. So we found out that you were willing to come into the band as a drummer.
Correct.
Because you had played percussion in high school.
Right. And at the time, the drummer that you had, I said to myself, I can play better than this guy, and talked it over with you, and you said, yeah, we'll start a new band.
Right. And my sisters and my mom were very helpful in watching our sons,
Right.
our 2 young sons, and we had a couple of trustworthy babysitters. So we formed the band Guys and Dolls.
That's right.
With Josie.
Right.
And with Bruce, who played the bass in the teacher's band.
Right.
You were on the drums and I was on the guitar. And that's how we started the Guys and Dolls group. And that was quite a lot of fun to do that. But then that kind of petered out also, as I remember. We didn't get enough jobs. So, and I think Josie wanted to get her own band.
Right. That's right, Josie, and
I had
eventually introduced her to a drummer in another band, and so they wanted to form their own band.
Right. And
This
in
is the
fact,
story with so many musicians.
as it
Go from
it
band
is.
to band to band.
From band to band. She wanted to be the leader of the
Right.
band, and she certainly had the skills to do it. And so she and Jeff, who she later married,
Right.
Formed their own group.
So here you are, the leader of the band, but as much fun as that was for you and for me when I did it, being the leader of a band also is very difficult in many ways. Why don't you talk about that?
Oh, a wedding band especially is very stressful. I wanted to do wedding work as a musician because that was the most lucrative and also the cleanest work.
It was a nice environment.
Very nice environment. You're going to be
Having
with
fun.
people, right? It's not going to be with all these drunks and bars and
Right.
things like that. And bar gigs notoriously pay very, very little.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate that I hooked up with Teresa's Catering Hall and also with Gigi's Catering Hall.
I'm in Huntington Townhouse.
And the Huntington Townhouse, and also Anton's
Anton's,
in Hicksville. But that was after I formed the Dave Anthony Band.
Right.
So I wanted to form my own band. And I didn't want to use my friends anymore. I wanted to make it more professional. So I advertised and I met some guys who had master's degrees in music. I met this fellow, Bob Matthews, who was a fantastic piano player. And he had a friend, Don Fabian, who was absolutely a fantastic horn player. He played the flute and the alto saxophone, the best I've ever heard in my life. and we got a drummer, Nick Latiro, and we formed the original Dave Anthony Quartet. And that band was very successful. As a four-piece band, we were relatively inexpensive in the catering circuit because most bands had at least 5, and sometimes 6 because they had a bass player. But Bob was such a good piano player. He played the bass with his left hand. You could split the keyboard at that time. And he played the bass and the keyboard with the right hand, so we didn't need a bass player. And I sang well enough that I could carry the tunes. And with Don, the fabulous saxophone player, we got a lot of gigs. So one year, I was still teaching full time, and I remember I had 80 catering gigs on the side, which meant that for most of the time I was never home.
Right.
And that's when you decided that you wanted to be in the band. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. But again, as with every band, there's always difficulties, and I remember that band broke up eventually.
Yes, it did.
And then because at the same time, coincidentally, DJs came on the scene, and DJs were half the price of a live band, and so at that time, jobs were getting less and less. And so you turned your energies into something different. You still had some catering jobs, but then you started playing classical guitar. How did you get into that?
Well, just as you said, I was playing classical guitar. I had always played a little bit of classical guitar since I was a teenager. And I had a book of Fernando Sohr's 20 etudes. And I could play up to etude number 17. These were graded solos. So if you could make it to number 20, you were really good. So I made it to number 17, thank you, Lord, with a lot of rehearsal and practice.
I remember that.
And I had always
fingernails.
And I kept my interest in that. So when the catering scene dried up around 1987, I decided to start doing classical guitar, and it was very demanding. I had to practice minimum an hour a day just to maintain, and to learn a new piece took at least 6 months. So it was a tremendous amount of work, but I did very well with that, and I started to write some of my own original music for the classical guitar too. And I have 2 CDs of classical music for guitar that I wrote myself, as you know.
I do. And you came in 4th place in
that was in 2009. It was the Guitar Player Magazine International Competition, and I submitted a piece that I had recorded in 1996. And so many years later, it did win 4th place, and I was very, very proud of that. But unfortunately, in the year 2000, as you know, I injured my right hand, and I had to have surgery on the right hand, and I could no longer play the classical guitar style.
So I know for a while there you weren't involved in any music anywhere. You didn't have a band, you didn't play classical guitar, but now you have 2 bands. You have an Italian band and a 60s band. So the Italian band came first, I believe. How did that come about?
Well, as you said, for a while there, I wasn't really working with bands. I was doing solo on a classical guitar, and in the year 2000 came, I couldn't do that anymore. So what I did while my hand was healing, I wanted to maintain my contact with music. I started studying with Carl Olson, studying voice. And Carl was offering, through the Smithtown Township Arts Council, he was offering vocal classes, very inexpensive, and he was great. So I took 2 sessions with him. I think it was 3-month sessions, so it lasted 6 months. And I studied with Carl for 6 months, and I started getting into voice. And of course, classical voice training usually includes Italian music.
Of course.
So I started to get into singing some Italian songs, but I realized over the years, because we had worked at primarily Italian-American catering halls, we had worked for Teresa's and also for Gigi's. And those were wonderful halls for us. The clientele was Italian-American. And without a doubt, the bride would say to us, you know, we want you to play all the modern tunes, the dance music. Can you add an Italian song for my grandmother and grandfather?
Right.
And we always did.
You have to honor them.
Sure. So over the years, I realized I took count. I had 35 Italian songs that I knew all in Italian. So I went to the Smithtown Library. We were there with our grandkids. And I said to the librarian, you know, I'd like to do a concert of Italian music. And the lady said, do you have a CD? And I did have a demo CD of 3 Italian songs. And I gave it to her, and she loved it. So she called me back the next day and said, this is great. But it also turns out that one of the employees of the library worked for the Sons of, was a member, not worked, but was a member of the Sons of Italy. And the Sons of Italy wanted to actually sponsor and underwrite the concert if I added more musicians, more traditional Italian musicians. So I did know a mandolinist, and I knew a violinist, and of course you played percussion.
You were a percussionist.
And so we started Quartetto Ducati, and we had our first concert at the Smithtown Library in Wisconsin branch. It was a complete sellout. It was wonderful. Everybody loved it. So we decided to continue working in that vein.
So now that's been at least 6 years that we've been in this band and playing different venues in Nassau and Suffolk. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. And well, we did a gig in Staten Island.
Yes, we did.
Right. We also went upstate. Do you remember? We went upstate. We did a library upstate also.
We did Hofstra.
We did the Hofstra
Festival.
University Festival last year. And
That was a big gig.
Yes, we've been very successful with that. Doing mainly libraries, and occasionally I will play for a grandma's birthday party just as a solo, and I'll sing Italian songs for her, that sort of thing.
Okay, so now you have this Italian band, and what made you start the 60s band?
Well, my friend Bob Monteleone, I had been singing with Bob in the high school since 1972. Once he retired, we decided we'd get together and sing because we missed it so much. He missed it so much. I really had a lot of gigs and performing, but Bob missed it. So Bob would come over, and I always wanted to have a band that focused in on the vocals. Being an instrumentalist, I wanted to have that differing kind of experience. So I invited you and Bob, and we started singing everything in 3-part harmony.
Right.
And we did very well. Unfortunately, Bob's wife needed a lot of care and a lot of attention, so Bob really did not have the free time to devote to the band. His music is a demanding mistress, as you know, and you have to practice constantly just to do one gig successfully.
Right.
So we decided that Bob said he could no longer continue. We decided to continue on as a duo, and so
and that's what we're doing now. So I'm going to ask you what your most memorable performance was, and I know the answer to this because I was lucky enough to be there. And so we were invited to play at Necker Island. And why don't you tell us how we got to Necker Island?
Well, some people might not know Necker Island. It's in the British Virgin Islands. It's owned by Richard Branson, who's a billionaire. And it's his island, but it's a resort. And you must rent the entire island. You cannot just come there yourself, or you and your wife. You have to rent all 24 beds. Okay? So this was in 1996. I had done a New Year's Eve party for a wealthy gentleman in Nissaquag. And I did it with a keyboard player. And he liked the group so much, he said, "Would you guys play my birthday party?" And I said, "Sure, why not? When is it?" He said, "It's in October." I said, "Okay, no problem." This was New Year's Eve. And then he said, "But there is a problem. It's going to be in the islands."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "I don't see any problem with that." And as it turned out, I thought he was just talking, but when March came around, he said, "All right, well, we're ready to make the final arrangements for this." I said, "Oh, you mean you're really going to do this?" He said, "Yes, we're really going to do it." I said, "Well, I really can't take this gig without other musicians. So I'd like to have this one fellow who plays the saxophone and this other fellow who plays the keyboard. And I'd like my wife to come too. She's a great singer and percussionist, and she would never forgive me.
She would not let you go
She would
without
not
her.
ever forgive me if I did this wonderful job. So we went down there, and we did a 5-day gig down there at Necker Island. We were treated like royalty. And
it was tough, though.
It was a tough gig. We had to bring all the equipment on the airplanes.
And these little boats.
And the ferries.
And the truck.
And the truck. We had to have a truck to go over the mountains.
Right.
It was quite an experience to get there. And it was a wonderful, wonderful gig to play at this millionaires or billionaires playground. In fact,
say millionaires.
I mean, Oprah Winfrey had rented this place.
Right. Princess Di.
Princess Diana was one of the people. The Rolling Stones had stayed at this place. Right. It was a wonderful, wonderful gig. That was a
great experience, and I'm glad I was part of that. So, what are your plans for the future?
Well, I'm currently devoting a lot of time to Italian music of all sorts. I'm studying with Daniel Ragone, who's been a previous guest on the show. He's a wonderful vocal teacher, studying a lot of classical Italian music and vocally. And I'm also studying on my own Italian mandolin music. And I've been getting into the mandolin, and I've been doing that. I was asked to do a little mandolin concert, a small mandolin concert for the Suffolk County Italian Heritage Day for the county executive and the legislature, and over 200 guests at the Denison building. So I was lucky enough to get that little gig, and I've been getting into the mandolin quite a bit and practicing that. And I know you don't like the sound of the mandolin.
Well, I like one of your mandolins, but one of them I don't. But it doesn't matter. You like it and you love it, and that's what you want to do. So, well, I'll end the program by saying it's been a pleasure to interview you, and you've been a wonderful guest. Even though I knew the answers to all of these questions, really, I hope that the audience enjoyed learning how this great musician, and he really is a great musician, started in the music business.
Well, thank you, Paula. I don't know if I'm a great musician.
Oh, you
I've
are.
been a long-time musician. I
That's
stayed with
true.
it. Just stayed with it. I've been lucky enough to stay that, and I want to thank you so much for interviewing me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I hope you all enjoy. See you next week.
With golden light, I'm gonna go down in my dream. A starry night is such extreme. The island houses candlelight, the angel waters shining bright. I gotta go to Virgin Gorda, going to play my big gig there. And I don't care, I gotta load a lot of baggage. I gotta go while the stars shine bright. She's gonna come and shake my hand. You're gonna keep me safe from the wild man. Gonna share me